some feminists like
answers
say
every
that like
question.
patriarchy is the result of is causing like all the world's problems, or some religious people will say like running from God is causing all the like a grand narrative is like a thing that kind of like encapsulates and explains huge chunks or all chunks of society basically.
You were talking about Nick Fuentes and Christianity. So he uses that, right, as a credibility. It kind of falls into this. Let me give this example. Have you seen the people who use one big truth and they like add 2 or 3 false things, but they use the credibility of the one truth that they said, and people believe them from that, and they give the benefit of the doubt for their 2 or 3 false things? Because of that failure to see what's right in front of their faces, they're electing these people as their leaders. But until people can differentiate between the disingenuous and the ones that are actually using logic and truth and reason to come to their conclusions.
What the fuck? What are you doing in here? Am I in trouble?
No, can I add something?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Is that fine? Sorry to intrude.
No, you're
What the fuck?
I think the biggest problem is, right, in my opinion,
Yeah.
I think it all starts at the, like, how can I say this? Sorry, I'm going through a little bit of brain fog these days. I think the issue is, it starts like the fundamental, foundational areas of the conversation, right? Usually, when you're having a conversation, especially like in the areas you're having them in, usually it's around some sort of pursuit of truth, right?
Hopefully.
The issue today is that is not the case with most content creators. What they're looking for is the pursuit
Dunks.
of... Yeah, it's being right.
Yeah.
It's looking like they've won. So they don't care about... There is no truth in their argument. There is no pursuit of truth. There is no use of logic and, trying to learn, trying to look like they don't know and you're better. In their eyes, if you teach them something, they're lesser than you. It's this really backwards place we've gotten to in society. And that's why I think we're in the time that we're in. We're, like in this content creation time where it seems like we're going backwards, right? No one's learning anything. No one's teaching anything. It's all about who looks right, who looks like they're smarter. And that's why you see on Twitter...
I have the best...
That's why you see on Twitter, people don't go for based takes or correct takes through use of logic. They go for what will get you the most likes, because more likes equals right. Sure. And that's the issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I have like the best... Sorry, I just have like a phrase I use around this with people, and I think it needs to catch on the internet. And it's that there's no profit left in reality.
Oh, sure.
There's just no right? Like, it's just we have to have Andrew Tate, who's like this guy who says like, oh, if you work hard, you can get all these cars. But he had to like fucking destroy 100 women's lives to get those cars. Like the actual real people who like have gone through that work and built their lives out and are respectable, they don't have like 10 different Bugattis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you can actually get something or extrapolate something more from all of that, right? I think that this idea that if you're a hard worker and that hard work somehow turns into, becoming financially stable or very rich, somehow that equates to intelligence. That is not the case. Like, people in today's world, for some reason, they attribute high financial status as being smart. It's not the case. And that's why I think a lot of these people who are quote unquote rich are getting the benefit of the doubt and are seen as these messiah figures that know the truth or know all or whatever the fuck the case is. But in reality, from what I see, most of these people who have a lot of money are fucking stupid. They're stupid, and God knows how the fuck they got where they are. I can't even understand with the shit that they preach how the fuck they got to where they are. But it shows that we're attributing intelligence and we're attributing quote unquote IQ, if you want to use that, which I guess isn't a good measurement because half people believe it, half people don't. But I think you know what I'm saying. They're attributing that to where they are financially in life, and that's a big fucking issue. On top of that, if you want to go further, I wouldn't even say the creation of Andrew Tate comes from stupid people that want to listen to him and because they believe in that stuff. I think the creation of Andrew Tate came actually from the opposite extreme side. Andrew Tate is the result of the extreme left. Like, the extreme left wants to blame all the righties, all the ignorance, all this and that. But in reality, they created him by allowing the pendulum to swing so far left Andrew Tate is the result of that pendulum swinging far left. Do you understand? He is the result of that. So you could argue they created him. And that's the issue. Until we get rid of these extreme sides, we're going to keep going back and forth with these extreme leaders of each respective side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. Seems like all the sides like develop as like a reaction or response to the other sometimes. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's fucking just terrible these days, man. It's terrible.
So are you blaming Hassan for Andrew Tate?
Based.
Definitely that side of thinking, I think. But yeah, I think there needs to be a more middle ground. You know, there needs to be a more like centrist point of view, or at least, you know, middle left, middle right, middle. Like, these are the takes, and these are the places that we should be, and that's what I believe the future will be. Like, if we ever do progress to a future where, you know, mankind is at its peak, I do believe it's from a place where it's in the middle, or middle right or middle left. It's never going to be following one extreme side's philosophies or perspectives or policies or whatever the fuck. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of center leaning myself at the moment, I guess, depending on who you ask, so. I'm probably not going to disagree, yeah.
Like,
Well,
I think, can I just give you, so some people have been in here a couple times today, Train, and they've been talking about this concept of like a grand narrative, sort of like somebody like Nick Fuentes, basically, who has like an explanation of how his ideology fits in, it answers every question in society. And people feel like there's a lack of that with like a liberal democracy, where like we don't have like any grand narrative. We just have like a mosaic narrative, like every small problem has its own solution. And it's really easy to rally people around a grand narrative. How do you come from a centrist place and create a grand narrative?
Repeat all that again, sir. I was writing an email. I apologize.
God damn it.
I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. So you have this lack of a grand narrative in like our society. I think
Define
you
grand
probably,
narrative. Define grand narrative.
Yeah. So with Fuentes, it's all about Christianity and how Christianity is the most important thing. And like, if you can see Jesus as your savior, you're a part of this movement, and we all need to like band together. It's just, it's basically all the same thing. Like how you come together as like a brotherhood from multiple different angles. The same thing with like socialism, right? Like we're all workers. We're overthrowing the capitalists. We're all brothers, and we're all going to be equal. It's like these grand narratives, but they require more control. They require more people to be. They basically require like autocratic control to put them into practice.
A grand narrative is just like one lens that you view the world through that can kind of explain everything, basically. So you know how some feminists like say that like patriarchy is the result of, is causing like all the world's problems, or some religious people will say like running from God is causing all the, like a grand narrative is like a thing that kind of like encapsulates and explains huge chunks or all chunks of society, basically.
And sorry, just also on top of that, that seems to be fundamentally incapable with like liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is about having specific solutions to specific problems and then allowing people with differing viewpoints to work together, whereas these grand narratives require everybody to buy into the same ideas.
Yeah. So what was your question at the end of that?
So the question is how do we get everybody on the same page from a centrist point of view? Like, how do we give them a centrist grand narrative?
I'll tell you how. First, we focus on education. Listen, the problem is this, okay? It feels as if the importance of education, or at least, leaders pushing for that importance of education, is dissipating as we go further, as we progress further into time, and I think that's a big mistake. Sure, our system is backwards financially, and that needs to be fixed, but this idea that education is pointless it doesn't do anything, or all these classes you take, you can't actually apply them to, the everyday jobs or entry-level jobs, et cetera, et cetera. People are misunderstanding the like core fundamentals of what these, like said classes do for you. It gives you the ability to hone your critical thinking skills. Until we get to a place where everyone has this baseline ability to critically think and to think for themselves, we're not going to be able to get anywhere. So the way that you bring all these grand narratives together from like a centrist point of view is the use of logic. Do you understand? So first, we need to focus on education for all and find a baseline level of education for all where people can hone their skills of critical thinking. Once you get there, and people have at least a baseline level of logic and common sense, and they know how to apply it to certain circumstances and situations on like a level that is in line with logic and common sense, I believe that is how you bring both of these sides together and all the grand narratives together to, from a more centrist point of view. It's logic and reason, right? Each side, they pervert their. So, for example, you're talking about Nick Fuentes and, Christianity. So he uses that, right, as a credibility, right? So it kind of falls into this. Let me give this example. Have you seen the people who use one big truth and they like add 2 or 3 false things, but they use the credibility of the one truth that they said, and people believe them from that, and they give the benefit of the doubt for the 2 or 3 false things? That's what's happening in these grand narrative situations on each respective side. People are preaching these idealistic, narratives, I guess, if you want to call them those, right? They preach them, they sound great. But then they sneak in 2 or 3 hypocritical, contradictory ideas, or like philosophies after they preach the initial one that makes sense and has truth and reason binding it, right? That's the issue. Until we get people to see that, which I believe is by somehow giving them that baseline level of critical thinking and the ability to think for themselves, we won't be able to get anywhere. Because of that failure to see what's right in front of their faces, they're electing these people as their leaders. But until people can differentiate between the disingenuous and the ones that are actually using logic and truth and reason to come to their conclusions, until we get to that point, we're going to be fucked. So that's why I really believe in pushing for like the education and of everybody. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I would say that makes total sense. I think the only place it breaks down is one, fundamentally how capable is like the general populace of gaining that level of critical thinking, and then even if they have that level of critical thinking, can they become so invested in their narrative that they're willing to excuse those lies even if they recognize them?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's gonna come from See, that part I haven't figured out yet, because I truly believe there's one thing that is fucking us all over. This is a little bit harder to explain, but let me just kind of say it as I'm thinking it. Right now, from what I've seen, obviously I don't want to generalize, so this may be anecdotal, but I really want to see it. I really want to say that this is what is going on. But I've noticed like a phenomenon that's been happening, even in the real world, not only the internet, but this happens in the real world. And that phenomenon is this. For some reason, a long ass time ago, okay? A long time ago, we developed some sort of instinct where if somebody looks good and they sound good, they must be good, right? We give them the benefit of the doubt. We give them our trust initially without them proving it through any sort of action. And that has carried over till now, and that's what I believe is clouding everybody's judgment. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that is the biggest issue. When somebody looks good in today's society and they sound good, in everyone's reality and narratives and visions, and in my personal opinion, I believe it's what I call the comfortable reality. The comfortable reality is a black and white world that carries over even through adulthood, where you can see evil versus good. That people need that. They need that to ground them, even though it's not the truth. It's not anywhere near the truth. A lot of the times from our personal experiences, we notice that it's usually the person who may look bad or may be a little grumpy or rude that ends up being the more empathetic, genuine, nice individual through action. And it's the one that looks good and sounds good that ends up being the disingenuous, more rat-like figure. But for some reason, people do not want to challenge that because it disrupts this compass that they have, this very clear-cut way of seeing things, and I think it scares them to look beyond that. So I would say it starts from that fundamental instinct that we have to see the world and see, good or bad in these ways, right? So just looking good or sounding good. I think it's a big mistake. I think it misguides a lot of us. And if you look at politics, that's a perfect example of this, right? It comes down to who sounds the best and looks the best, and a lot of the times those are the people who make it into office. I mean, obviously Donald Trump would be the anomaly in this example, but in that circumstance, I would say that's the result of the critical thinking skills we're talking about mixed with the pendulum swinging and the time we're living in. So like obviously it's not as simple as I'm making it sound. There's obviously other factors that kind of complicate things a little, but does that make any sense? Everything that I've said?
Yeah, it all makes sense. I still think you didn't engage on the first question I asked, which
What's
was
the first question?
it was if we, sorry, but just to like, I think that all makes sense, and I think that's a huge thing. If you look at just, I'll back you up here before I point out how you didn't engage. You look at Canada. One of the things people joked about with Justin Trudeau was that he was going to get elected on looks, and I truly believe that's what happened. Right? Also, kind of 2 for 2 right now on ugly presidents being impeached. So there's another one. But the first question I asked was basically like, what? Because I think this is something that like the rationalist community runs into is what if the general populace isn't capable of the level of critical thinking required to see through those grand narratives and see like the small lies?
Then we're fucked. It's that simple. Like then we are fucked. Like if that is the case, then we are royally fucked. It's that simple. Like I mean, maybe I would need to sit. I mean, yeah, I would need to think further about that. But my gut, I guess my reaction would just be, we're fucked.
Yeah,
like it's that simple. We're fucked. But I don't believe that's the case. I think. See, the thing is, it's not fuck. Like it just goes so much deeper, and I'm not sure. Like it's so hard for me to think of a time where all of this kind of comes in perfectly, but. I think the product, the end result of an individual who is operating at an average IQ, right? Like I think our goal is for everyone to end up at an average IQ, right? And I don't think it's only education that leads to that. I do think it is upbringing, right? So it's a perfect mixture of upbringing mixed with education, mixed with both of those applied sciences, I guess, to your experiences. So I would say it's a mixture of a lot of things. So I don't know. Oh man, it just gets so much more complicated. But yeah, I mean, if people aren't capable of reaching that level of critical thinking, then we're fucked. It's that simple. Like that's something that's why earlier I was telling you that we need to become more education oriented to try and achieve that baseline level. Is it going to happen in 10 years, 20 years? Probably not. But in the next 100 to 200 to 300 years, I think it is something that's necessary for us to survive, to live, to evolve. It's necessary for us to become a more education-oriented society or species to see any sort of growth and long-lasting survivability. That's what I truly believe. Like, we need to adopt logic and reason, and obviously find out how to get the perfect mixture of the empathy and the human sides that kind of mix in with logic and reason to progress in a positive way, or to survive. I mean, that sounds a little bit more extreme, but that's where I think it all leads to. So if we can't achieve that, then I think there will be whether it's war, civil war, world war. That's where we're headed if we don't achieve that. That's where I truly believe we're headed if we do not find a way to tackle that problem of critical thinking for all. But at the same time, I guess there is a place where you could argue, it's so much more complicated, because there is a place where you could argue if everyone achieved the level of critical thinking I believe necessary, you could argue that all of these systems wouldn't work, right? Would religion work? Would all of these different government structures and, systems work? right? Would people accept that there's a 1% that, you know, lead at the top and then 90% that need to, right? Because at the end of the day, capitalism or not, right? Oh man, it gets really complicated when you really think about it. But I really do think the baseline and the start would be education, a more education-oriented society that pushes people toward that. Does that make any sense? Or am I just batshit crazy?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm actually totally on the, well, I think I'm on your page where I think people are capable of reaching that level of critical thinking. But it's sort of this fundamental difference in like intelligence that you need to like come up with policies versus evaluate whether they're good for you. So like somebody who's very average IQ, maybe even below average, is capable of digesting information and saying like, oh, like if you can tell me what the pros and cons are of each, I can make the right decision. Like you don't have to be like Einstein to make that decision, right? So like we it's not a super high bar, but you have to give people good information, and so that's where the whole conversation around like deplatforming and misinformation comes in. Because if people aren't getting the right information, if they're not getting all of the information, then they're fucked, because now they're just relying on somebody to tell them what to think, right?
Yeah, but the problem with deplatforming, obviously to up until a certain level, is we also, if we want to achieve, okay, so in order to achieve that level of critical thinking for all, the quote-unquote smarter ones have to be better, right? And here's what I mean by that. Let's say somebody is preaching some vile, stupid shit, right? Obviously,
I hope you mean morally. That's all I'll say.
yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Obviously, there's a limit to it, right? Hate speech and shit like this shouldn't be allowed, and there should be a deep, right? But what I'm saying is, if we don't learn to get to a place of teaching rather than canceling, what happens is we're going to end up in an area like, imagine two islands. One island of people that are accepted to, you know, think a certain way, and an island of everyone who does not. It only canceling and ignoring only pushes the individuals that we're removing further down the rabbit hole, and it gets us nowhere. We need to find a middle ground where we can teach. Do you understand? That's what we need to do. No matter how hard it is, no matter how impossible it may seem, we need to maintain that hope. Like, that's one of our, I know this is gonna sound like a movie or some fucking shit out of a goddamn book, but we need to maintain like the hope, and we need to teach instead of cancel. You understand? We need to rehabilitate instead of cancel, and we need to teach, because as soon as we remove, people just go farther down their rabbit hole, and it further splits the sides and further polarizes everything. So the people who can think need to be better, no matter how hard it is. That responsibility is greater, and I really believe it's up to those people to lead. The problem is,
The
right
problem
now,
is they're playing some random MOBA on stream right now instead of leading, right? Or MOBA, I don't know what fucking game Destiny's playing. To be
Nice
honest.
try, dipshit. Get fucked.
hatred shouldn't be allowed. Train, part owner of Kick. Yeah, well, Kick, our goals right now, it's no hate speech, right? No nudity, no porn, things like this. Obviously, we've been out for 4 months, so moderation is little to none at the moment. I do find it extremely disingenuous that people bring that up as a, you know, counterexample or some sort of showing of hypocrisy in what I'm saying, considering the fact you're leaving out how Twitch and other platforms operated in their first 4 fucking months of being live. You understand? I do think in the long run, you know, once moderation, you know, a better moderation or a larger moderation team's in place, we will take these channels down who are engaging in this, no matter what size they are. We just need to get to that point. You know, we've only been out for 3.5 months, 4 months. I understand, you know, a lot of you are sick and tired of that excuse. But I believe it's not an excuse, you know. We are 4 months in. Now, if we're a year and a half in and that's still an excuse being used that, oh, we're new, only a year in, it took Twitch 10 years, then yeah, at that point we can engage in that conversation. But I think right now it's way too soon and a little disingenuous. But hey, that's my opinion, so we can agree to disagree.
Damn.
Nobody wants to give you guys credit for building out like such a like scalable, functional platform in like 4 months. It's actually fucking insane. And you guys have clips working already and shit. It's actually nuts.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been tough. I mean, the craziest argument I've heard is, you know, from the virtue signalers. Oh, you know, one of Kick's owners owns stake. Blah 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 blah. It's like, Okay, so this is exactly what I mean by critical thinking, right? If people had that just base level of critical thinking, they'd realize, wait a second here. Huh. Amazon, the parent company of the site that I stream for, is responsible for countless amounts of atrocities, whether it's workforce or other, methods of acquiring quote-unquote blood money, whether it be working and having billion-dollar contracts with gambling companies, or whether it be third world country workforce issues. So I don't understand why they close their eyes when it's, they move the goalpost. When it's a company that, has found a way to run and dominate the world, and, they close their eyes. But as soon as it's somebody running something else, suddenly their eyes open up and they want to, attribute things that they wish to inconsistently attribute to their own parent companies that they work for. It's just very odd. But like I said, I don't want to start justifying lesser evils with greater evils, etc., etc. I think that's wrong as well. But I do ask for some consistency. Does that make any sense? Am I crazy for that? Yeah.